Okay, I will say hello and welcome back to another episode of All About Balance. Jesus Christ, it started well, lads. And today I am joined by the king of UK podcasting. I think that's how I'll introduce him. The king of UK podcasting.
Look at that. That's a start, isn't it?
It's Mr. Dan Lester of the Fisticuffs Podcast. Sir, how are you doing?
Wow, much better hearing that. Thank you very much, my friend.
Absolutely.
Wow, I don't know where do we go from there? All
right, well, that's
peaked.
it. Podcast done.
5 o'clock
right.
yet, but here we go.
Yeah, it's been good to speak to you. I'll speak to you soon.
I'll see you guys. Link in description.
No, I mean, look. There's, when we'll get into a point that we were just talking about off air, but I think when I first started this, right, I didn't see a ton of UK podcasts, not big ones anyway, not ones that were either prolific in their content or prolific in their following. And that could well be, right, that my podcast knowledge is just shite, right? That's very, very, very possible. And then I've kind of seen 3 podcasts that have really become prolific, in my opinion, especially in your space, which is the MMA space, right? Or predominantly the MMA space. And that is yourself, the Fisticuffs Podcast. That is the guys over at Severe MMA, which is the Severe MMA Podcast. And then there is Pete Carroll and Niall McGrath, and that is The Bash, right? Or what was formerly known as Eurobash, now known as The Bash. Like, obviously, those guys are more like news outlets, whereas you are a guy that interviews athletes and fighters and just people, right? And gets their stories. But those were the 3 main people that I was aware of in that space. And there's a misconception with this podcast, my podcast, which is that it's a jiu-jitsu podcast, it's an MMA podcast. And it's actually, that couldn't be further from the truth, right? But you, for instance, you were somebody that was quite a large inspiration for me, actually. Like, I first started and I was kind of like, oh, okay, like, I'm just going to kind of put this stuff out and see what happens and go from there. And then I saw you putting content out 2-3 times a week, every single fucking week. And I'm like, okay, it's possible. It's possible. There are guys out here that can do it, and they can also train full time, and they can also have a full-time job. Okay, it's possible. Cool. Right? So you are the king of UK podcasting. There you go. It's done.
I appreciate that a lot. Thank you, my friend. Just to say, again, it's an interesting one. And it's the whole Nietzsche thing to butcher. Is it any how can work out, any why, this, that, and the other. And again, if it's something you want to do, you'll find time for it, this, that, and the other. And again, it's a lot of the podcast. I hate to use the term interview purely because I feel it comes across very sort of structured, very regimented, very much like an agenda as such. Mine's more like I just love sort of chewing the ear off people. And if they want to sit and listen, I can record it. It's fantastic. And the thing is, quite a few people I've had on, they're people who I've appreciated from seeing them compete, seeing them doing whatever else. So I want to chat to them. And usually what the conversation ends up being prior to this is me trying to explain to the people why this person's so interesting, why this person's sick, why this is a big deal. Thinking, why am I bothering with these people? They don't give a shit. Let's speak to the person I actually care about. And ultimately, this whole thing has been for me. Like,
yeah,
you think about, you're going to fanboy over someone. Like, how is she going to do that unless you get like an hour or 2 just to chat to them? I'm messing Instagram enough. You got to get a proper conversation.
I do get that, actually. It is an utterly hedonistic pleasure, right? Of just being able to, because, one of the things that's really interesting to me is, this is my own podcast on my own platform, right? I say my own platform. I host it with Buzzsprout, right? Which is, is not my platform, but you get my point. Like, I control what I put out, right? And who I bring on. And you're the same. Nobody's telling you, okay, Dan, today you've got to have whoever, some fucking scrub that's just started jiu-jitsu 2 days ago, right?
Some soy boy.
Exactly, right? Some fucking Dylan Dennis level scrub. Do you know what I mean? Like, Jesus. But
it's a gamer chat at this point.
Yeah.
F in the comments.
Oh yeah, at Harry Dude. Fucking 1v1 me. Let's go.
Rust.
But like, we're able to communicate, hopefully, with the people that are actually, willing to communicate with us, right? And the people that have the time and all this kind of stuff. You're able to have a conversation with whoever you want, right? And as you say, like, obviously, there's some people that you've had on that you're you're appreciative of and you're fans of. I'm the same, right? I'm the same. Whether they're like yourself, for instance, I'm a fan of you, and I was very, very gracious and very honored to be on your podcast, right? And you know, obviously now we're returning the favor, but you're able to just do what you want, right? You're able to be who you want. The platform is yours and yours to sculpt.
I mean, again, a lot of this comes down to this. It's a bit contradictory as such. They say there's no agenda, there is an agenda. You want to make it like you want to make it authentic. Like, yeah, it's got to pass your own sort of personal criteria, like most things. Like, when it comes to starting a podcast, people think of it as quite a grandiose kind of thing. Like, oh my God, can you really do that? Thinking, yeah. Have you got social media? What makes you think you're of a celebrity level to have social media? Everyone has social media. Have it your own sort of thing. And this is kind of my sort of point behind it. Like, I didn't ask anyone if I should start it or not. I asked my brother who helps me out initially get the setup, can I do it as in physically? And I just sort of did it.
Yeah.
Like, same with the tattoos and stuff. Like, I didn't ask anyone, should I get this, yes or no? Because it's not for them. It's not their problem.
Yeah.
So it comes down to that kind of thing with a lot of stuff. And I really appreciate that sort of comment about how it's, you know, it's me. And this is really what I want it to be. Like, it's not got to be all, you know, suit and tie or very structured, that, you know, very polished questions. It could be quite informal. It can be whatever else. It can be authentic. And that's the bulk of it as well. Like, I've had some really interesting conversations with people about some really, it's quite heavy topics, but again, the conversation naturally flowed that way. Like, prime example. So one of the guys I had on, Drew Sullivan, he's a brown belt under Roger Gracie, former, I think it was in the NBA. It was Team UK, like, basketball captain.
Jesus.
And again, non-stop, 6'8", absolutely lovely bloke. And again, I'd hate to roll with him. Imagine how horrible that would be. But anyway, and he was friends with Kobe Bryant. And we was talking about what it was like when he passed away, this, that, and the other. And again, I can't help but feel if you were in a more mainstream podcast or something else, it'd be a lot more impersonal, a lot more navigated around these kind of things, trying to really market this. And this is where a whole sort of ethical sort of dilemma comes in. Like, yes, if I market a very heavy moment that happened, as genuine as authentic that is, it kind of takes away the sincerity in it. Like, that conversation, and again, like most of this sort of conversation when they get quite heavy, it's very much like, I give them the option afterwards. Do you want to take anything out? Purely in the sense that I appreciated the rawness and the honesty. But if it's something you don't want to be public, that's not a problem at all. And to exploit that, to try and advertise it, as much as it came from a very sincere place in the first place, I can't in good conscience share something like that with a headline like, oh my God, Kobe's former teammate says this, that, and the other thing. That's not me. That takes away the whole sincerity. I'm not going to catch one out. I don't want to do that sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And you said about how nothing has to appease other people. It just has to pass your own personal criteria. What is that? What is your personal criteria?
Oh, good question. I like that. So personal criteria, just a two-part answer to this. Personal criteria can be however ambiguous, whether as long as it passes your specific sort of whether it is. Now, my personal criteria for having someone on my podcast, first of all, I don't like people who beg. By beg, I mean, if you like my posts and say how much you love it, when I know you don't mean it and I know you want to be asked, that is just like, see, like, you're just ingenuine. If you want to be on and I haven't either acknowledged you beforehand, outright asking me is a good start. I mean, I always respect that. Even if I didn't have thoughts of getting you on beforehand, I've got a lot more. You got up in my books of having that sort of confidence. Be like, okay, can I come on? But again, the people who have on an air of authenticity. Because again, as much as if you go through, oh, you need to be like sponsored, you need to be like, oh, this like big sort of brown or black belt high level compared to all these medals, otherwise you're not interesting. No, I've met loads of people who are like high level competitors of dull as fucking dishwater. They're boring people because again, you get people who are very monotonous in what they do. So okay, I eat my chicken, I eat my rice, I go to bed, I train, and I rinse and repeat. I think that's a nice conversation for 2 hours, thanks. But you get people who are like, okay, they've had 1 or 2 fights or this, that, and the other. And there's such more complexities in the way they're trying to analyze the whole situation, the emotions they're going through, all this kind of stuff, the way they can articulate certain things. And again, it's not necessarily, I give a variety of people a chance to have their way of explaining things. Again, try not to have a rinse and repeat, sort of this is my formula for a podcast. So a long answer to a short question is more in the sense of, are they someone I can speak to? Can I have a conversation with them? And that's normally where it goes from there. If I like them, it definitely helps. I've had people on who I wasn't a fan of and the podcast reflected it, and I'm not going to say who's who, but you'll work it out if you listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first point I have there is that's people begging to be on your podcast is a good problem to have. Do you know what I mean? Whether they're,
Really?
well, of course. I mean, I think have I had anyone ask me to come on the podcast? I guess so, but not in a fashion of liking every post and saying how amazing it is and this, that, and the next thing. And that may well be hyperbole, but yeah, like I think it's a good problem to have, and it's a reflection of the situation that you're in, right? If you have people that clearly admire the platform enough in order to act in a certain way that forces you to have to give them attention, right? Then clearly that's a good thing, right? That's a good space that you're in. But I think the personal criteria of having somebody that you can talk to, I mean, that's a pretty fundamental one for a long form podcast, right?
If nothing else, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could just stare at each other for 2 hours, I suppose, but I'm not sure that's as riveting for the audio listeners as for the.
That's in the Patreon. That's exclusive content.
Yeah, that's fair. Hashtag Fisticuffs OnlyFans. Check it out.
Only fists.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
That's a personal one. Don't worry about that. I think
Yeah,
bio.
right. Excellent. But yeah, like I think that there's something to that. There's something to that. I mean, I wouldn't mind having somebody on that I have a disagreement with, frankly. I think that would be, to be honest, I think it would probably make for good listening, really. And it's kind of one of the primary reasons that I made the podcast. But yeah, I think the point of having a personal criteria is an important one, right? Like it's important to not just make this a free for all. And that's not to say that this is some high flying exclusive type sort, that kind of deal. For me, it's not that. It's merely just, there's only so many weeks in the year, right? And you've got to balance out who you want and who you find who you think is going to be interesting and who's interesting to you based on your own interests, right? But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have personal criteria, definitely, and even for the way that you as a presenter present yourself to the podcast, if that makes sense. Like I try to not think of the podcast. I call it the podcast rather than my podcast. I don't like to think of it as mine. Like I like to think of it as an entity on its own, and people then come to imagine it's a table, right? The podcast is a table, and you've pulled up a chair and you've sat at the table today, and I've pulled up a chair and sat at the table, and we're sharing ideas over the table. And then when we leave the table has those ideas soaked into it, and we can walk away with whatever we walk away with, right? At least that's the metaphorical reason that I have for it.
See, I like that way of sort of looking at it. And again, I like the way you're sort of breaking down how it becomes almost this big sort of thing, this almost exclusive VIP sort of Dick Swinging Club. Okay, this is the big, This is my podcast. This is the thing. And not really, it's that. I like the way you're sort of taking away that sort of host kind, not bias, but a kind of host advantage. Okay, this is my thing. You have to sort of have it in my sort of agenda. You've got to have it this kind of way. Again, it's a separate thing. This is a melting pot. We're having a conversation, and this is the mutual, not agreement, sort of, the Jean-Jacques Rousseau's kind of social contract, sort of general will. The table is general will. This is something we all want to agree on. Mm-hmm. But our individual ideas of sort of what build into this to help get us not like a Venn diagram, but we get a happy medium of, okay, this is where we're going to come to as our final project, and this is what's engraved in the podcast table, whatever you want to call that thing. Mm-hmm. So that went very metaphysical. I went on a red one.
But I like that because there's something that's really interesting. I find really interesting about following your personal page, and that is, every week you see 6 new books that have arrived in whatever succession, and you're somebody that listens to a lot of audiobooks and reads a lot of books, and a lot of those books are philosophy based, right? Ethics based. Why do you do that? What's the pull to those things?
Okay, so this is where it gets. Does it get morbid? Does it get a bit more? Let's call it honest.
Let's go.
Let's have fun with this. So personal mental well-being is a very interesting section of my life. And I'm very matter of fact about things, not so much in a nihilistic sort of life is bleak, this is the end of the world, but sort of, okay, I'm not happy sitting on the beach doing fuck, or I'm not happy sort of the idea of the traditional sort of things and concept of being discontent and being a bit like, is this it? It's not a good enough answer for me. So when it comes to reading different kinds of philosophy things, it gives me different sort of pathways to go down. Okay, this is a different way of looking at these things. And again, when you're frustrated for a lot of situations, articulation is normally the biggest sort of issue you find at that point. Like a child, for example, you don't know what to say. Like, you're just really angry, upset. You don't know what to express this. And my fun with the philosophy, especially what I'm reading now, it's a little history of philosophy, which is really nice. Like different philosophers for each chapter, try and like build on that kind of thing. It's really nice getting these different concepts and different premises. And again, it doesn't necessarily open up pathways as such, but it helps you articulate feelings you're already having.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to like the Darren Brown sort of stuff. So like the one thing I hate the most is the term self-help. I think that's so toxic. It makes it seem like you're some sort of nutcase in like a straitjacket and you need some sort of help. No, it's just I like it as just a sort of self-development. We change the wording around. I think that's so, I don't know, there's stigma and then there's just that. It's just a bit, don't know. Also, I enjoy it. Because when it comes to, I think I'll butcher this from Neil deGrasse Tyson of, why would you read fiction when the world is so interesting as it is? Sure. And it's kind of true. Like when it comes to reading different kinds of books. So I have this balance in what I do of productivity and recreation. If I'm getting too far into Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell, thinking, this is getting fucking exhausting, I put on something more fun or something a bit more actually a bit silly. I'll either go on like listen to a silly podcast like PKA or something a bit more like, taking the piss a bit. Or I tell you what now, it's called What If by Randall Monroe, is it? And it's basically like all these stupid hypothetical questions, like really cleverly answered in really loads of detail, that kind of stuff. It's a lot of like, okay, it's still kind of like productive, kind of like you could answer the question, but it's a bit more like, okay, I know when I'm burning out, and it's different elements of things I like. And regards of why I like to read, it's interesting how it sort of came about really, because prior to lockdown, I never really read books. I never really bothered with them, and I couldn't really get into that kind of, they're just words on a page. I try and either remember them as I'm reading them and sort of lose the sort of flow of it. But I listen to podcasts. I like podcasting because Joe Rogan, this, that, and the other, and obviously All About Balance. Say that as read. That's fine. And then I started listening to audiobooks and started listening to Anne Middleton's The Fear Bubble, and listening to a story of that kind of cadence. I then read his First Man In book, and then reading that in my head with his sort of his voice, his cadence, this, that, and the other. You can sort of you get into a flow of things. And from there onwards, it's quite easy to then recreate that in a certain way, shape, or form. And like Jordan Peterson's one was quite easy, 12 Rules for Life, because again, that's sort of Kermit the Frog-esque voice. And I've said it with a tattoo of him on my leg. And I still think it sounds like Kermit the fucking Frog. My dad said that as well. I'm thinking, don't worry too much, it's all good. But yeah, so the long and short answer with that is it helps deal with the sort of mental frustrations and blocks. Stoicism, I like a lot because I feel that's a lot more applicable. And when you actually try to apply it when you need to, it's interesting the reactions you get. And also, general relationship management people. You realize certain habits of people, not trying to be like Freudian or like Jungian, sort of like psychoanalyze people, but you sort of, taking a step back to reflect on why they're acting in a certain way and what is meant by what's being said is really interesting. You can really take a lot more from certain things. I think that's
I think the biggest point that you've just made is about articulation, right? And that's that essentially language is an ever developing beast, and it's also something that you continue to learn as you go and go and go and go. And there's a hierarchy to language, the understanding of language. If you go and read an Alexander Solzhenitsyn, for instance, or an Albert Camus,
like Archipelago,
like whatever, right? If you go and read one of these literary geniuses, and then you go and read a Harry Potter book, right? And I'm taking nothing away from the Harry Potter books. I love them. I grew up
transphobic
with them, right?
books.
Like, oh, Jesus. But like those books are in different leagues for literary skill and literary application, right? And then, as you say, if you can then if somebody asks you, if you're angry, frustrated, sad, whatever it is, happy in some fashions, right? And somebody asks you to express your opinions, express your thoughts, express your feelings, and you don't have the ability to do that because you don't have the words for it. Well, when you read one of these masters like a Seneca or or a Young or a Peterson or whoever, right? And they're able to give you in long form, and I mean long form as in like 200-300 pages long form, breaking down a word, and that word is sadness, for instance, or the scenarios that surround an emotion, the scenarios that surround an action and a reaction to those various things. I think then that allows your mind sort of expands into spaces that were already there, right? The ability was already there, but it almost rounds out the way that you define a word, define an emotion. It gives you that perspective, and then you're able to articulate yourselves in a different fashion, with a different kind of metaphor, with a different kind of cadence, with a different kind of tone, as you've already said, and potentially just some new words, right? And on the Peterson 12 Rules for Life thing, it's interesting. I had a conversation with Dave and Sarah Lawson last week that was published today, and I said that 12 Rules for Life is essentially Jordan Peterson cashing in on his ideas. Discuss.
Well, anything published with the possibility of being sold and being profited is going to be cashing in on something. Like, we got to get that bread. We got to get the patron. You got to respect something. But in the same breath, again, it's go on.
Yeah, maybe if I just extrapolate that point a little bit, just because otherwise I'm just, I'm not doing it justice. Essentially, what we were saying was this. I believe that, like you've said, things about like you're not really content with just sitting on a beach for however long and doing nothing. I agree. Like, I don't really like the notion of happiness. I don't really believe that it exists as a construct, or not, at least for me. For me, the things that are more purposeful are meaning and purpose and these kinds of things, and doing something of meaning and doing something of purpose and struggling through things and whatever. And my point about Peterson is, if you go and read Maps of Meaning, right, or if you go and listen to his biblical lectures or whatever, that to me is peak Jordan Peterson. That's when he's deep in the fucking weeds, son, and he's knee deep in his thoughts. He's knee deep in his workings, in his feelings, in everything, right? And Maps for Meaning, 12 Rules for Life feels like he's gone on a Joe Rogan podcast. People have been like, here's millions of dollars for you to speak to us. And he's like, let me make more millions of dollars. Like, I feel like the Maps of Meaning came naturally to Jordan, right? And what I mean by that is the work that he'd put in his entire life, Maps of Meaning is essentially the result of that, right? It's just, it kind of burst out of him. And it feels like that. It's a fucking massive book. It's a dense book. It's a thick book.
Thick.
Yeah, thick with 2 fucking C's, mate. Maybe even 3 C's, mate.
Ooh, that's pretty thick.
It's pretty thick. And, you get to a point where you're like, okay, this was burning inside of this man. And I feel like Peterson should have just continued, right? But yeah. Anyway, that was that was the context behind. I feel like 12 Rules of Life was essentially a dumbed down version of Peterson in order to generate him some cash money.
Okay, that makes more sense the way you articulate that about buzzwords. So everyone listening, this is a bias included, caveated, because again, I have a tattoo of his logo on my leg. So if I go against it too aggressively, it seems a bit, get the laser out and get it sorted. So I kind of feel the nature of what I like about Jordan Peterson's lectures is the way he can explain these fantastic and phenomenal philosophers, this, that, and the other. Again, I wouldn't have appreciated half of Jung's, like Piaget's concepts without him breaking them down in a more digestible format. And I can't help but feel 12 Rules for Life is a more extended version of that. Because again, if you start talking about, like, I don't know, Nietzsche was talking about like the hero sort of ideology, or was it the hero myth or something like this, or some, I don't know, something just completely arbitrary, it's excessive. Like, you won't be able to apply it the same way, because application is something so important when it comes to knowledge. Because if you can't apply what you know, you don't know it. you can remember something. Regurgitation and application are different things. And this is a huge thing when it comes to, it's that sort of cross that, ooh. Sorry, I thought you reacted.
No, yeah. I mean, essentially what I was going to say was, and this is kind of my point also, or was my point, is what you've just said. And if I'm assuming, right? So maybe I should let you finish your point. But what my assumption is of what you've just said is you read Nietzsche, right? And essentially it doesn't go in the first time, right? Probably doesn't go in the first 3 times you read it.
No.
But because you've got somebody like a Jordan or a Carl or a whoever that will break down these concepts for you, they make it becomes more malleable. It becomes easier to digest. It becomes easier. I don't really like the idea of things being easier. I think if you're going to read Nietzsche and you're going to absorb one of his ideas, then read it and absorb it. If it takes you 50 years, that's okay. Like, why is it okay for us to think of these great thinkers, read these great thinkers, and then ask for a shortcut?
So I strongly agree with your point in the sense of the nature of being art and a form is to be interpreted by yourself to then get your own expression and own understanding of this. However, I feel if you haven't necessarily made your own assumption, if you didn't quite understand what's being said to you, giving that sort of outline as such as a reference point, because again, if you've showed someone Beyond Good and Evil and after the migraine's gone, they might start to appreciate what's being said. And again, that's a huge point of this, because again, it gives you more. I found it gave me more appreciation for what's being said, more application of my own sort of life and understanding sort of archetypes, bits and bobs. Again, I appreciate both sides of this point. I don't feel they're worlds apart, because again, I feel that your point is you should have your own personal interpretation of, again, if I might be wrong with this, your own interpretation of what's being said to you. Again, making sure what's being said, you've got your own life application from this, you know what's been meant. However, having someone else's already cookie cutter-esque kind of, okay, this is the format, giving up, this is what you're going to, on a plate here, or here's your philosophy for you. Not yourself with a nice little seasoned garnish. But no, it's more a sense of, okay, this is what is being said, this is what he's written. Because Jordan Peterson does reference quite a lot saying, go and read the book. And this is a concept he's broken down from this. And prime example, if you go on YouTube, you'll see Jordan Peterson break down The Lion King with Carl Jung's sort of archetypes. And that in itself is a nice way of doing that. And I feel that tone of it is set really nicely. And when it came to 12 Rules for Life, so when it comes to self-help, as I already said, I despise that term. Most of it is fairly like axiomatic, fairly like sort of straightforward stuff, tidy bed before you leave your room, that kind of stuff, take a bit of ownership. But again, the same sort of core concepts, like everything else. And I call it squatty stoicism, where it's like all the same, okay, I was in the army, so now I'm a stoic, and now this is a way to live your life and just be hard and get up at 6 and drink, water and don't drink coffee. Okay. Insert SAS man with the same tattoos and, it's the same book. All respect to their service, this, that, and the other, but the books are very much the same. The things to take from them, but I felt with this, it was a bit more, I don't know. There are elements of certain things, but I felt the concepts are a bit more unique to what is the usual sort of rinse and repeat dribble. So with 12 Rules for Life, there's a few things I've personally taken a lot from. I still do today. So I think the final chapter in there, I want to jump around, is, pet a cat when you cross one on the street. And the whole chapter is about his daughter, Michaela, about how when she was growing up, she had all these horrible operations. Everything was just going for real time of it. But the chapter's about really taking time to appreciate the beauty in the world. And that sort of concept in itself is just fantastic, because when you're just fucking pissed off, it's that never. I had this other day. I was driving back from the gym, left early because I felt to run down. No, Rowan, I'm all good. But I thought, I feel shit. You know what? I'm going to get my mum some flowers. Now I'm feeling shit, but I'm going to do something, just pop in, something like that. Something very much like, okay, what can I do to appreciate? Every time I see my dog, give him a big hug, and I fucking love you. You're so like, you don't ask for anything except for the same food every day, which you're fucking delighted for some reason, but no, I fucking love you. And little things like that, it's like, okay. And again, there are elements of things. And when it came to, I'll tell you another rule, is an interesting one. I'm sort of going a bit more of a different tangent here. We are. The first rule in it is stand up straight with your shoulders back. About the whole lobster concept, that we have a similar sort of serotonin sort of system as them lobsters do, I think. And the way we sort of argue. And the concepts with this got really misinterpreted of sort of a dominance thing, but it's not. The general rule of thumb with this, as he's explained a few times, is if we are together, if me and you are a couple and we have an argument, if one of us wins, the other one will lose. And if we lose, we'll be defeated. We'll be a bit like, low self-esteem, bit down. And no one wants to deal with someone like that. So it's more a concept of, okay, don't try and win as such. Try and make sure you both get what you want from the sort of conversation. And things like when you're sort of picking fights with your partners or this, that, and the other, or general people you're speaking to, the concept of winning and someone losing depends if you want to spend time with them or not. If you want to make them feel low and shit and not worth their opinion, it's a good way to go about it, just break them down and make them feel stupid. Whereas if you try and help them articulate their point, try and understand what their side was, and try not so much not to win, not to make them lose, that kind of makes sense. So where the initial question came from of feeling it's been more sort of sold out essentially for the cash money, get in the bag, yes and no. I feel it's a natural evolution for his career because, again, he could either be pure and stay in Toronto. I know you can. Let me finish my point. He could be pure, stay in Toronto, do his lectures about maps of meaning, and go completely on there, and that'd be his life of YouTube videos of that, and be underappreciated, I feel. But sort of going towards the mainstream has given him more of a platform. And again, if you go on his website, it's all the sort of, you could pay for your personality test, this, that, and the other. And again, it gets a bit like, I don't really want all the different logos and the rules that on a shirt, on a phone case, this, that, and the other. But I kind of feel it's just a natural evolution in the modern era when it comes to modern day philosophy as such. Return.
Yeah, so 12 Rules for Life feels like those books you got in school that was like English for Dummies or Maths for Dummies. Right?
Life for Dummies.
That's what it feels like. If that book had come out with the same cover as English for Dummies or whatever it is, then I wouldn't have been shocked, right? And that's not to say, that is absolutely not to say that some of the stuff in that book is gold, because it is, of course it is, right? Of course it is. However, I wonder if what you took from 12 Rules of Life, how much of that has been affected by what you've previously read? And the answer is it has to have been, right? In some fashion. Because unless 12 Rules for Life was literally the first book you ever read, ever in your life.
Imagine that.
I mean,
be exhausted to read that first time around.
Probably, right? Probably. But I just feel like there is a priority of things and a hierarchy of things. And I think that philosophy, and this is obviously embedded deep in my own bias, right? What I'm about to say, obviously, I can see it coming already. But I feel like
oozing.
Yeah, it is. Like philosophy and philosophical notions are something that they're essentially the bedrock of what it is to be human. They're stories that we've tried to tell each other in some fashion for millennia. I don't feel like we should dumb them down. I really, really don't. I feel that there are some things that we have to give entrance to. And we have to give things like English, how to speak, how to write, these things. They're very basic entrance. But as Jordan says, to use one of his own points, right? How could you, like the tidy the room thing, how could you expect to go out and change the world if you can't even keep your own room tidy? Fine, valid point. Valid point. My argument would be the same for deep philosophical notions, right? You should be able to keep your room tidy before you go and start tackling these deep philosophical notions that I'm now being handed in a McDonald's wrapper rather than a Michelin star with all the wine tasting and whatever. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's elitist of me, possibly. Very possible. Probably highly probable, actually. But I feel like, it kind of feels like, for instance, let's take something as common as jiu-jitsu or MMA or whatever, right?
Keep it on brand.
And keep it on brand, yeah. Jesus. Like,
there we go. That stopped you dead in your tracks, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Really fucking did. Like, if you think about, fuck you, I'm going to use a different example now. Like, if you're learning how to cook, right? If you're learning how to bake a cake, right? Somebody's going to teach you how to make an absolutely basic Victoria sponge before they teach you how to make a 16-tier marbled wedding cake with every single cake as different flavors, right? Because there's levels to this shit. And I think that you will find basic philosophical understandings just by being aware of life, right? Rather than having something from somebody who had such a level, right? How many 12 rules of life did Nietzsche write?
Oh.
None.
He
Is the
didn't write
answer.
the equivalent.
Right.
He just went like, you know, everything.
He went balls
just
deep.
thrown-
He went balls
Oh,
fucking deep.
He went
Think
so deeper than that.
right. And think about Kobe Bryant. Think about LeBron James. How many games of basketball do they play where they kind of, you know, they give people a chance? Zero.
Never.
Zero. How many times do you see Rafael Nadal allow someone to win a game because it helps them to understand tennis more? Zero. None. The best people in their field at all things, and I'll finish here because I know you've got something to say, they go all the way, all the time until the wheels come off. And when the wheels come off, you don't see them anymore. I feel like that's how just life should be lived, right? Pick something, whatever it is. If it's your podcast, if it's the podcast, if it's whatever it is, if you've decided that you want to learn about how, your cuticles should be, just fucking do it and do it all the way until you can't do it anymore, and then don't do it. Because
I agree with most of that point to an extent of, okay, if you're going to do something, you do it yourself and do it properly without having handouts and having the sort of, again, ingenuine sort of pre-made thing for you. The examples didn't really make sense in the sense of like tennis and everything else, because again, that's very much a competitive thing of Rafael Nadal's not trying to help his competitors get better. He's trying to win in himself. Whereas I feel what Jordan Peterson is doing is trying to break things down so more people can digest it and start the sort of process off in the first place. Again, if you have white belts in a class, you don't teach them fucking bearing balance day one, you teach them how to shrimp, if you can even do that much. Mm-hmm. And again, you help them get a platform to then start the sort of platonic sort of cross thinking, the sort of, okay, if you give someone this book, so what the 12 rules equivalent, I get what you're saying in the sense of, I feel the difference between Jordan Peterson and Nietzsche in this sense is Nietzsche is a philosopher in his own right. I feel Jordan Peterson is trying to explain already made philosophies and try to break them down in a more applicable sort of sense. So not in the sense of he's trying to come up with his own things. He's trying to explain predetermined things. So that in itself becomes a bit of a different point. So almost, it's a strange one. And again, as much as I get what you're coming from, a sense of English for dummies and this sort of thing in itself, I would rather someone who isn't that good at life as such to have something laid out for them to get started and help sort themselves out. The self-help as such, for lack of a better choice of words, that would fucking pain me to say. And then the layers to it. So contrarily, again, to get to your point you made earlier, 12 Rules was one of the first football books I read post during lockdown. And this started my philosophy thing in the first place. So I started through the book itself, and all the references to Nietzsche, this, that, and everything. Who the fuck are these people? And so before I even got to the first chapter or such, I had to put it down because there's so many references to different things. I thought, you know what, I'm going to catch up, and started going in the different Jordan Peterson lectures, reading bits of Nietzsche. I bought, I can't really sort of, my books about Beyond Good and Evil, this, that, and the other. I almost bought the Gulag Archipelago. I thought, no, I can't be fucked with that. I'm always start Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'm going to go through all of that. But the gist of it was, it started the philosophical kind of breakdown, and again, even things about the books, and getting more context to what I'm actually reading. And it made things so much more. I mean, the words, I've never heard the word engendered being used so often and axiomatic. And have you read is it Scientific Revolutions or something by Thomas Kuhn? He uses the word paradigm, I think a million times. It's exhausting. It's ridiculous. But again, I sort of work backwards. And again, not everyone is that kind of proactive. Just to think, okay, I don't get this, so I'm going to read it anyway, or am I going to ignore it? To actually understand what's being read, and say understand with a big caveat, the sort of asterisk. I understood it as much as I could from what I've already read, and again, listening to his lectures on the book itself. So, like most things, I feel it's your own application, which is where the value in it holds. So, also to sort of add to this point, the nature of saying 12 rules for life is almost a bit of a, I don't know, this squandered sort of talent, a bit of a sellout kind of, against the moral ethics sort of thing. I feel like he still has the other stuff available. He still has everything else on top of this. It just adds to the repertoire of, you can get the authentic lectures, You can get the cookie cutter book, or you can get what you want in between and get a shirt and get a shirt with his logo on it if you want, as well at checkout. I mean, it depends on where you feel the sort of authenticity and the sort of credit sort of, I don't know, lies as such. Does it take away from his lectures that have already been made? Does it lose the value? Go on.
To me, it kind of does, because my argument will be, and so I sit on both sides of the fence, right? One side is that, you know, people, as you say, that aren't good at life, whatever that even means, should have an ability to be brought up to some form of level. But I feel like bringing somebody up to that sort of level requires things that are not philosophical. That requires things like a house to live in that they haven't got to worry about it being taken away from them or burning down or being stolen from, some food to eat that they don't have to worry about that being taken away from them or stolen, or too, you know, it's too expensive to buy, clothes that they can wear that are comfortable and warm, right? And then we can start talking about philosophical things, and we can start to talk about, you know, books and this and that and the next thing. I think after we satisfy some absolutely basic needs, that will allow people to become better at life, whatever that even means, right? And does 12 Rules of Life take away from Peterson's legacy? In my opinion, it does, right? And my argument will be this. And to go back to the Rafael Nadal thing, like you said, does Rafael Nadal lose games, which helps people get better? No, he wins games and gets people better that way. Kobe Bryant the same, LeBron James the same, because they want to be like that guy, right? Because he's the trailblazer, him and Federer, right? Because they're the trailblazers, because they always win everything almost, right? Because they are in pursuit of excellence, everyone rises to meet that guy, right? It's the same with the legends of any sport. In 50 years, there's going to be a basketball player that would smash the shit out of Kobe Bryant and LeBron James, even if they're on the same team, right? That's just how shit works, right? In the same vein that Andre Agassi back in the day for tennis would get fucking slaughtered by Nadal and Federer now. It's the same in my opinion, for somebody like Peterson, right? Think about what Peterson could have produced if he didn't spend the time on 12 Rules of Life, if he didn't go on the tours, if he didn't do this, if he stayed in the same position that he was staying at. Now, that would have been impossible because, you know, the role he was in as a lecturer, that just, for the reasons we already know, the gender pronouns and whatever else, it just wouldn't have been possible. But the argument that I made in the last podcast was of the gentleman that designed, the architect for St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. That man believed in that idea, and the people that built that cathedral, that church, believed in that idea so much that it took 3 generations to build it. So 3 generations of people believed in that idea so much that they continued to build. And that guy that architected St. Peter's Basilica wasn't even alive to see it. But he believed in excellence of that idea so much that he literally took it to the grave.
Okay, again, there's a lot in this.
Yeah, there is. There's a ton in this.
So let's play around with some things. So, regards of legacy, which is an ambiguous term in the best of times, is an interesting one. I'll start around point. So, bad at life. What I meant by that, the people who feel they need these books, the people who feel they need the support, need this help, people who are struggling in regards of either like a Maslow's hierarchy-esque sort of thing, have they got their sort of physiological needs, this, that, and the other. So they feel they're lacking something is the gist of it. I don't know, my relationships aren't working, my job is, I hate my job, my life is shit, or whatever. So people come say, I buy this book, please help me, Jordan. You're my only hope. Something like this. And again, the other caveat to this is if you're saying about this doesn't represent, it's a bit of a too easy sort of spoon fed to these people. The amount of people that's physically helped, people who've said, you know, this book has helped me sort my life out. Do you think they should have been out of natural selection, sort of spiral of the fittest, been cold in the sense of, okay, you should be miserable and work out yourself when you've got the opportunity to help these people? I'm going to stop my point early so you can respond to that, because I've seen that's, you know, got a bit of a reaction.
Yes and no is my answer. Like, I feel like, and this is going to just blow this whole conversation out of the water, I imagine, because I'm opening up just such a larger point. And that point is that I believe that there is a collective human consciousness that we all share in some fashion. I don't know what to name it. I don't know what to brand it, how to title it, how to describe it. But together as humanity, there are all in some fashion shared values and shared systems that we all abide by. Whether they differ via continent or culture or whatever is fine. I don't mind. But they are there in some fashion. And I feel like, again, I'm speaking from an entirely privileged position, but I believe that the people that do struggle, they are adding to that pantheon of knowledge on how to struggle, how to do things either poorly or properly, right? Because there will be a percentage of those people, regardless of whether they touch Peterson's 12 rules of life, that will manage to struggle through their problems, come out the other side, and will have a story to tell, will have a route, have a method, have a way to conduct themselves. And there will be people that won't, right? And you can't have success without failure. It does not exist, right? Now, whilst I understand that this is a brutal viewpoint, and actually in application, I would more than happily talk to whoever it is that's struggling or whatever. But that's because I'm not a fucking genius, right? That's because I'm not Jordan Peterson. I don't have the mental ability of Jordan Peterson. Go on.
Sorry, because of the delay, I didn't know if you stopped or not. I don't mean to almost accidentally interrupt a couple of times, but here we are.
That's fine. Go on.
So I think the thing we're looking for is the general will, the sort of social contract of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Again, I'm going to butcher that again. That's fine. But again, that whole concept of, that sort of, we all want mutual things. This is like the common denominator of things we want. And I get, that's an interesting point you made there. And this gets, again, very close to home, I want to say, I don't know. So when it comes to trying to better yourself, in inverted commas, that, okay, the more things I do, I feel better, I feel more motivated again. So now my schedule is I get up, I go for a run, drink X amount of liters of water a day. I'm going to learn a language, this, that, and the other. But then I have a bad day. This adds to more things I haven't done, which then piles onto the thing I feel shit about. Oh, I'm shit. I didn't do this, didn't do that, didn't do this, that, and the other. And it adds to this. And you can become very sort of self-destructive. So again, regards to that sort of social sort of consciousness of, oh, I'm more aware of things I'm not doing. Or the David Goggins approach of, okay, this is shit. I'm not even going to think what I'm doing. I'm just going to do it. And then I feel good afterwards because I got hard, whatever that means. And I let him crack on with whatever that means. But this is where I feel variety is important. And this is where these conversations really open up a lot of different, I don't know, articulation, not in just the vocal sense, but more the emotional sense that, okay, what do I feel? Do I feel happy or sad? It'll sort of, you get this very bland sort of, okay, what, yes or no, one or the other, but then you get more and more intricate. And little things like axioms and like maxims and stuff, you sort of think, okay, is this something just a cliche? You hear something like, we are the stories we tell ourselves. And you think, okay, what does that mean? Said, oh, I'm getting bullied in the gym, I'm getting beaten up, because I'm shit. I think, am I shit? Am I telling myself I'm shit, which then makes me shit? Oh, am I the person who always gets like, cheated on because I, that's who I am? No. Am I acting like that way? I'm sort of vulnerable unnecessarily? Am I around these people? Again, you notice things you do, and then you can sort of change in these actions. So as much as my response to your point is almost tough shit, in the sense of, okay, like, yes, you're struggling. Yes, it makes it worse. However, it's part of the same point that the deeper you go, there's the Carl Jung thing of the treasure you seek is in the cave you fear to enter. Like, most people, if you ask them, they'll say they don't know why they're struggling with certain things, but most people, you could sort of work it out. Think, yeah, I could kind of guess it if I really tried, but you don't want to admit it because then you take responsibility, and no one likes that. That ruins all the fun. It's still got to be everyone else's fault. Can't be your fault. No, definitely not. But again, on top of the same sort of point in itself, it's an interesting one. And back to the Jordan Peterson point, I agree with your point in regards of his sort of legacy and his name and this, that, and the other, the fact that it sort of caveats it of being a bit more commercial and a bit less authentic. But in the same breath, out of the bias of it's benefited me and it's helping people. There's the whole Immanuel Kant thing of, if it's done morally in the nominal sort of world and everything else, then it's a good thing. Regardless of the intentions behind it, it could sort of suggest what it actually was meant intended to be. If it was meant to be a cash grab, or it was meant to be a genuine expression of sort of his applicable principles, it's either here nor there, really. That's to say, regards of my approach to the whole situation, bias aside, I've taken a lot from it, and people, if it starts the conversations, at least they can start going somewhere. Because when it comes to the whole sort of mental health stuff, for a prime example, was it yesterday before Mental Health Day? Well, you get the same sort of conversations of, let's talk about mental health, let's talk about, what does that mean? Like, prime example, I'll give you an example of most conversations probably happened on that day. You reach out to me saying, how's it going, Dan? And you're all right. I'll say, no. I said, no. Oh, talk about, okay. I've got these problems. And they're okay. And that's normally the end of the conversation, if they even get that far. And those conversations are an important starting point, but that shouldn't be the end of it. Because this is where, me personally, I struggle with this conversation with people. Because again, it's so much the other side of being too overly responsible for your own actions that I know what to do, I'm just not doing it, and it's just getting me frustrated. But without the sort of follow-up, without the actual doing something about it, this is where these conversations sort of fizzle out and don't get the same impact they need. Like, regards of sort of mental health conversations themselves, like, where do you feel they're missing out in the sense of the extra sort of layer to this? Because again, that's the first start of talking about it. Where do you feel should be the next logical step?
It's too much pseudo marketing.
Ooh, good answer.
So it's the same with everything. It's become a brand now. World Mental Health Day has become a brand, and brands are able to define cliche short sentences that on the very surface convey a very large, deeper image. However, when you dig into them, they're just empty, right? Like, okay, well, I mean, let's get into mental health then, right? We'll talk about that. Like, if you were to approach, look, I mean, if you're reaching out to somebody that you love about mental health, the conversation shouldn't start with, are you okay? Because you already know the fucking answer, right? If you're reaching out to somebody that you are well aware deals with mental health problems, struggles with those sorts of things, then if you're starting the conversation with, are you okay? Maybe try a slightly different tact, right? Simply because if you're like, for instance, I'm sure you have friends that deal with mental health. You probably deal with mental health yourself. Likewise, me, I have friends. I've dealt with that stuff in the past, and no doubt will deal with it in the future, right? If somebody says to you, are you okay? We're English. The stock response is yes, right? Yeah, I'm grand. You?
Yeah.
Right? You could be in the worst mood of your entire life, and someone's like, you good? Yeah, sound, mate. You? Dead. Finished. Over. Right? Like, we have to have a different set of rhetoric that determines these conversations. And that set of rhetoric should come from a place of love and curiosity. You should try to understand these people rather than, mimetically just portion out whatever this bullshit that comes out about reach out to your friends, ask if they're okay. Like, on the face of it, as I say, these are great campaigns. And to your point, they start conversations, but what they start is cyclic conversations. In a lot of, from my perception, they start cyclic conversations. What we should be doing really is similar to what Peterson has said. You as Dan Lester and me as Harry Powell, if our friends have mental health problems, we can't fix them because they're not our problems to fix, right? You can be enablers, right? You can be supporting, you can be scaffolding. You can be the scaffolding to fix the interior problems, but you're not the interior problem. The only person that can fix that interior problem is the house, right? That's it. And you can go and get a contractor that can come and help you, but it's you, the house, the construct. It's you that needs to fix the problem. So the first point that we should be starting with when it comes to mental health issues is determining what the problem is. That's the first thing, right? Just discussing, as you know, like, if you have a problem, let's say it's a podcasting problem, just having a conversation with someone generally will ruminate different types of ideas in your head because there's a different perspective looking at it. I do that all the time in my job. I work in IT. There's a problem. The server's fucking broken. And I chat to one of my colleagues and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And he's like, have you tried that? And I'm like, I have not tried that. Give me 15 minutes and I'll come back to you, right? the same can be said for mental health problems. The difference with these conversations and these Instagram posts or stories is that an Instagram post is seen for a day. An Instagram story is seen for less than a day a lot of the time. Mental health problems take fucking years to solve. So go on. I've just rambled.
No, you're absolutely fine. Again, I don't mean to interrupt or even cue for response. It's more the sense of the delay. But yeah, there's a lot in that, in the sense of the language is important. So again, there's the whole concepts of who is it? That unknown waters, you know how you'll swim until you get in them. So the sort of sense of you've got so many layers to being asked how you are. You're always saying, yeah, I'm all right, how are you doing? You don't even know what you even said. Whereas if you ask someone about something completely arbitrary, something completely out of the way, you have no idea how you react to it. You have to get a more conscious decision to think about what the actual answer is. Like if I ask you how many like holes in that sofa where all the stitching is, you're like, what? You have to look and really reassess, like, what the fuck is that? Again, you have to be a lot more conscious of what you're saying. And when it comes to, I like the way the analogy of you have to be the one to physically deal with it. The sense of, okay, go to the doctor, take some pills. No, what does that mean? There's a few interesting books on this. So Johann Hari's Lost Connections, I absolutely swear by it. It's a really good one. So for anyone who hasn't read it, imagine you have hints from that response.
I've read a synopsis. I've not actually read it, but sorry, go on.
So a lot of what this is, it's about the connections we have as a society. It's sort of almost like in a ring sort of thing. So there you are as the epicenter, and that the family, the well-being, and similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs as such, and that our depressions and anxieties is a reaction to our environment. And this is kind of makes things a lot more interesting. And when you come to the concept of solving something as a sort of finite, definitive thing, I disagree with that almost entirely. But I feel it's more a management thing. So if you rebranded your mental health to hunger, if you rebrand that to hunger, okay, so if I'm hungry, can I solve hunger? Not really, no. But when I get hungry, I can eat a sensible amount of an appropriate thing in a regimented time to make sure what I'm taking in not only resolves that initial feeling, but also afterwards, I'm left feeling in a better sort of place physically and also mentally. If I'm a bit hungry and I fucking wolf down some like kebab or something, I'm not going to feel hungry anymore. I'm going to feel fucking horrible though. But it's not going to have a nice after effect. And the same sort of sense of, okay, if I'm feeling quite down, if I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling quite keyed up, then assessing what is causing this, then working backwards. Is it the environment? Do I feel alone? Do I feel attacked? Do I feel like I'm apprehensive of something coming up, this, that, and the other? Because if you think of, I'm just going to have a tablet or something to sort of turn us off again, there's also the chemical imbalances, but that's more the sense of if you've already assessed your environment, that's when that extra layer comes in as a sort of, this, that, and the other. As you might have guessed, I'm not a doctor for anyone guessing, but sorry to burst the bubble, but here we are. But if you rebrand certain things, NLP is so important. Neuro-linguistic practice, I think it's called, programming. But again, it's that sort of idea that, okay, if the language you're using is so important, so important. So yeah, when it comes to, I like the way you're using the mental health as like a brand as such, because I get so sick of it. It's so toxic. Again, this sort of everyone thinks, oh, look, I'm a good person. I checked in on someone. No, you didn't. You dropped them a message just for the sake of it, so you feel good about yourself. Like, it's a nice gesture, and it's definitely important to have these conversations. But you know why you sent it. You felt guilty. You didn't want to check in that person. You don't care about that person. And a lot of it comes down to this internal understanding. Again, you need. So if you have a friend who's going through an absolute time of it and they don't want to listen to your help or your advice, then what? It becomes this whole very personal, very like, okay, why can't I help them? What can I do? And there isn't really much of an answer, really. The only real response is try and get in contact with people who are close to them as well, who can also help with this. But back to your point, he's been able to solve these problems. And by solve, it's find a way of coping with them and making them manageable. That's not to say getting pissed and forgetting about it, because that's, again, back to the hunger analogy. The initial fix is there, but it's the after effect and source of the recurrent damage. Again, it's an interesting one.
I mean, I think that your point about language is important, and actually, as a slight alternative, like if you sit and preach to somebody that's in the weeds of a problem, one, they're just not going to listen because they're in the weeds of a problem, right? What they want, if somebody's hurting, What they want is a remedy to the pain. They don't want long-standing axioms about how life is going to be different if you do this, that, or the next thing. They want quick fixes, right? And a lot of the time, quick fixes just don't come with words, right? Quick fixes just come by presence, and they come by whatever it is. So one of the things I would offer is, like, if you go and you have a conversation with somebody and they don't want to listen to whatever it is you're going to say because they're too far in the weeds, that's fine. Just do something else, right? Either sit with them or take them for food or whatever, right? Because again, physical place also relates to mental place a lot of the time, right? Like when you're sat at your desk for work, for instance, your brain automatically will gear itself towards a more work-focused mentality. When it's leisure time, you'll slip away into other things, right? And that's not to say that those aren't interchangeable. Of course they are. Thoughts are whatever they are. But even if you go to an office, right? If you go to the office, quote unquote, fucking hell. If you go to the office and you sit down at your desk, you're like, okay, I'm here for work today, rather than I'm here to browse YouTube and watch cat videos, right? Like, and look, we all do it. It is what it is.
History. Here we
yeah,
are.
it is what it is. But like, that's where we are. And if somebody is sat in their room or their house or whatever it is, just mulling over these negative situations that are occurring in their life, remove them from the house, right? That's the quick fix. But to your point, I know you were agreeing with me, but it's like, I've attempted on multiple, for years, I've attempted to solve various people's problems. Do you know how many times I've done it? The answer is 0.
Yeah, not many.
The answer is 0. And the answer, and look, this goes to my point kind of about Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life book, is eventually, after killing myself, not literally, obviously, but figuratively killing myself and stretching myself so thin by attempting to solve other people's problems, you know what I learned? Not possible. Try something else. I didn't need Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life book for that. And that's not to say that, getting a book like that isn't going to help you. It's fine. But I also feel like the power of learning something on your own is way better than somebody telling you something. And let me give you a slight example to that. If you were a kid and your mom told you, when you're older, this is going to make so much sense, and you're like, fuck off. No, it won't. It's bullshit. I don't need to worry about that. You hit 25 and you're like, no, shit. Right? And there's that guilt in you. You didn't listen. Right? But then when there's something that you have tried yourself, it doesn't work, and you find the answer, you're like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. It's just, there's way more gravity to it, in my opinion.
There's a book called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. He sort of explains that point quite well. That it's all about the path of the Buddha, like this sort of journey for enlightenment, and the concept. He doesn't want to learn from the teachings; he needs to get wisdom through application and experience. So, as much as I appreciate that point in itself, that it's all well and good you telling me not to do certain things because certain things will happen, and then you have to learn yourself and build this sort of rapport. Again, I don't see something against having a platform to help people who, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. If you touch a wire and it's electric, you're like, ow, fuck. You would say, Dan, don't touch it, it's electric. You wouldn't say, oh, you'd work out yourself because it makes more sense, it's more fulfilling. And again, it's for certain problems you feel, you know what, if you give people a platform that if they want to look for pre-solved problems, I don't see something against that. It's up to them whether or not they apply it or not.
That's true.
So again, I see the point in the sense of, okay, you get your own sense of, I know what I've done. I learned the lesson in my own articulation. So this is a thing in itself. So get back to jiu-jitsu on sort of on the same topic. Here we are. When I'm doing my one-to-ones with people, if I'm doing technique-based things, what I'll get them to do afterwards is explain back to me, to teach me in their words what we've learned. Yep. Purely for articulation. Because again, if they rinse and regurgitate what I've just said, they understand it to an extent, but if they can say it in their own words and then they can use it, it makes more sense that ways round. So as much as, let's use that fence analogy again. If you touch a fence and go, fuck, that's electric, that will hurt. You use it in your own words. You don't have to say the amount of voltage, this, that, and the other. From there onwards, you sort of know where you're at with it. I mean, it's a bit off brand as such, but it's more. It becomes an interesting conversation. Mental health, again, the spectrum it is becomes an interesting one, regards of what it actually means and what the stigma is. So the stigma, I feel, is that if you say someone's got mental health problems, you imagine One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you imagine Jack Nicholson, sort of, it's that and the other. It becomes a whole thing. Whereas it could be anything from every time I feel I get a bit stressed, I get quite down. Or it could be, I'm struggling, I can't really get out of bed. And there's a huge spectrum. And to sort of lump it all together and say, are you all right? I say, no, then what? Because imagine how many of those conversations people had on whatever day it was, saying, how are you? Oh, I'm struggling. Okay. Want to talk about it? No. And that's the end of the conversation. All meant in goodwill, but, it's understanding how to, again, the same point. It's about learning how to articulate these things. And beautiful way you described that, in the sense of, okay, if the direct conversation isn't the best way to approach the situation, it's then going around that, trying to change the environment, trying to, show an extra layer of support and comfort. Like, sometimes this goes in the 12 Rules for Life book as well, about being with people who want the best for you. And that sometimes you want people who won't necessarily make a big fuss about a certain situation, but they're who will, like, when something bad happens, they'll cry with you. When something good happens, they'll want 10 more things like that to happen to you and be genuinely happy for you. Again, the different layers of different style of friendship. Went on a lot.
I think it's also about priority of problem, right? Like, the thing about don't touch an electric wire because it will volt you. Yeah, okay, fine. But again, you don't need to be told, because when you touch the wire, you're gonna be like, fuck me, that was painful, right? Now, of course, a parent or whatever would be like, Dan, don't be a dickhead and touch the fucking electric wire again.
Stop doing it.
Don't put your fucking finger in the plug socket again.
Get that fork out the toaster, you twat.
They don't want to see you hurt. They don't want to see you. And they also don't want to fucking deal with you going to hospital and having to sit in A&E with you for 6 hours.
Again.
Right? Again, for the 15th time.
It's just Sunday, Dan, stop it. Just unplugged it now.
But like, on the point of mental health and whatever, like, I just think that there's, you're right. It's almost like charity, right? And charity isn't, in a lot of ways, charity isn't love, right? Charity is an organized set of principles that is initially based on an idea of love, but in actuality is a very logistical, very robotic, very mechanical,
impersonal kind of thing,
right, method of delivering something to something else. Charity is, in a lot of ways, what should already be done by a society, but because there's a big fucking hole, they call it charity. They put nice metaphysical, ethical things behind it, and then good things happen. Beautiful. We should just be doing that shit anyway, right? But it's the same vein of if somebody reposts one of those stories, the mind ad of like, reach out to your friend or whatever. All right, cool, but we should be doing this anyway, right? These conversations should already be happening. It's like that absolute bullshit cliche, if you don't buy a dog for Christmas, right? Yeah, you don't, right? It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. You don't just reach out to your mate and be like, "You all right, pal?" And he's like, "Yeah, sound. You want to play Warzone? Sound." Right? Like, and your point about having friends that cry with you for some things and that super celebrate things when things go well. It's like, yeah, like but that's not something difficult to ask for, right? That's just like basic friendship shit. You know what I mean? Like, if you see, and this is, it's basic friendship shit when you've kind of realized what basic friendship shit is, right? And that's where we're getting into this really difficult melting pot of personalities and different levels on on the hierarchical emotional scale. And that's that, you know, when you kind of realize, at least in my opinion, when you get to a point of actualization where you're like, this is what I would like from a friendship, therefore this is how I should act in a friendship, generally those things start to happen. You know what I mean?
So with that point itself, again, I feel a lot of where this topic has gone and where it's sort of resonating around is the more layers of what's what I'm looking for? Layers of articulation and sort of breaking down to the more specific details. And that the friendship analogy is perfect. So, okay, you meet someone, we're now friends. What does friendship mean at that point? You don't really know. You just got someone who you say is your mate. And then as things go on, you have more experiences together, you start understanding how they react to certain things. And with that point in itself, the real concept behind this in more detail was more when you have, say you're struggling, saying, oh, I'm having a time of it, this, that, and the other. You don't want someone saying, oh, don't worry, my time's, it's worse for me. I'm going through this, that, and everything. Oh, shut up. It's not about you right now. I'm struggling.
Sure.
And when it comes to people celebrating with you, it's more a sense of, okay, they're not trying to caveat what you've done by saying what they've achieved.
Yeah.
Like if I win, I don't know, gold at blue belt, a purple belt, brown belt, and say, yeah, well, I got a brown belt, it's more important than yours. Fuck off. No, they said, you know what, we fucking smashed that, mate. Nice one. I mean, they haven't said that yet, but we know one day we'll get there. It's all right. Get some mates. I'll get some medals and be all right if it's happy.
I was gonna say, mate, if I win a gold medal, then maybe I can have that praise. That'd be good.
When I do as well, it'll be good as well. We'll talk about when we get our medals.
Yeah,
we'll rebook the podcast for then.
Yeah.
I'll blame COVID for the last 6 years of my competition.
Nah, I think the only person I can blame is just me being shit, mate. Not gonna lie to you.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean,
Poor ha.
Yeah, poor ha. I don't know. I think that I just have this thing in my head about this pantheon of knowledge concept, this pantheon of knowledge idea, and I just feel that whatever we do, frankly, whether it be positive or negative, in some fashion, will lend itself to this pantheon of human consciousness. This I use the term of a database, right? Like everyone's constantly logging entries into a database, whether that be literally through your Facebook messages, or whether that be because, you know, you've dealt with a situation poorly and then you deal with it better, or you deal with the situation poorly and then you deal with it worse, right? Like these are all shared learnings in some fashion, and even more so now are they shared learnings where we're all so unbelievably connected to each other. But I don't know. If you could give somebody, I'm trying to come up with a question, like to frame a question that I have around outside of 12 rules for life. How do you start somebody on the track? Like, do you actually, let me phrase it this way. If Elon Musk said, you can have two options, world, right? We all get a voting button, yes or no. And that voting button, for the question for Elon Musk poses is, I could stop doing Tesla, Neuralink, SpaceX, and the Boring Company. And instead, I could write a book on roughly how to do well in business, right? Or I could not write that book and I could continue all these companies for the rest of my life. What would you choose?
Well, that goes to the point of, do you want to do what he's doing? And also, do you want to do it yourself? And again, it's this sort of weird axiom of, is it something you're personally focused on? Because again, you appreciate in the world that all the valuable things in different fields that aren't yours are important, but it's not your thing. So as much as his book about business, it's an interesting question in itself, in how, what is more important to you, the development of the world around you or your personal development and what you're doing. And on top of that, it's more the specifics of what would you miss out from not having extra Teslas and, flamethrowers and, whatever else he's got going on, tunnels, this, that, and the other. But as to say, I can't help but feel if you gave someone, if you had this cookie cutter book and the same sort of 12 rules for life kind of idea for business, you'd get a lot of business doing the same thing. But then the evolution would almost stagnate at that. Then it'd have to sort of change in itself. And you have different versions published, this, that, and the other. It becomes a bit of a tricky one there. So my response to that question would have to be no, and let him crack on with his boring company, as a normal person would say, because again, that's not my prerogative for what I'm doing. What's your response to this?
It has to be no.
I
think that there's information should be disseminated based on the hierarchy at which it's attained. I think this is my overall point. My overall point is that if you have a super genius like Elon Musk, then he's going to disseminate information down to geniuses, not super geniuses, but geniuses. And then the geniuses are going to disseminate that information down to half geniuses. And it falls all the way down until it gets to the common man like me, right? The person that could just about get out of bed in the morning and then turn around and make it without falling over his own feet. Then it gets to me, right? That could take 100 years, but that's okay. I feel like the super geniuses should be disseminating information at their level of genius, because eventually, over time, my children's 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 children will be at a basic level of intelligence that was Musk's super genius all that time ago, right? In the same vein, if we had a conversation with somebody 2,000 years ago, they would regard us as super geniuses, I suspect, if we could even speak the same language. But go on.
The experience behind it. We don't know what the weight of these words mean. Like, if he says to you, he made, for example, from a competition point of view, keep on brand. If you say you made weight, okay, I say, Harry made weight for his match. What does that mean? To me, it just means you made the weight. To you, means, okay, I dieted this amount of time, I did more water load, this, that, and the other. I've done this. So it's the weight behind what's being said, how shallow this is. But as I say, thank you so much for your time, my friend. I really enjoyed doing this.
Mate, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, it's an absolute pleasure. So before you run away, just tell people where they can find you, please.
Sure. So on social media, on a good old Instagram, we've got Fisticuffs_podcast. The podcast is available on Spotify, iTunes, and all the good streaming platforms. Personal ones, _, and the same on Facebook. Don't use Twitter, but Fisticuffs_pod if you want to see my Instagram being regurgitated on Twitter.
Beautiful. Well, like I said, enjoy your training. Thank you very, very much for your time, and I'll speak to you soon, my friend.
Thank you again for your time, my friend. All the best.